Hello and good morning. This is a quick update on my 2mm layout. So I finished the track work. I'm really pleased. This is the first piece of track I've laid in a few months. I laid this one a couple of days ago, and this is a much older piece of track. This was really the only successful one of about 4 that I built and then gave up because I found it to be I found the way I was building it was very fragile, and all of the turnouts that I built broke within the space of a few minutes of each other, and I basically got quite upset and threw my toys out of the pram. So that's why there's not been many 2mm updates. But I thought that it was worth reinvestigating, and I purchased a couple more jigs from the association. I think in total now I've got 4 that I use. And those 4 probably come to around £25 total, which sounds like a lot, but then if you think that 75 turnout sleepers and 500 regular PCB sleepers collectively comes to another £5, and you can get 10 meters of rail for another £5. You can lay 4 turnouts and get the jigs for the same price as 2 regular turnouts from Pico or something, and then from that point onwards your price per turnout plummets. And what you can do, which hopefully you can see here, is start to lay things on curves. So this is, you probably can't see, but that's actually on a very shallow curve, and I wanted to lay this track in simple formations initially before I start getting more complicated. My ultimate goal is to lay a double slip or an outside slip and an asymmetric 3-way. But I figured it's probably best to just get this stuff working properly first. And on those lines, this actually represents all the layout track for a little layout plank that I'm going to build. So I'm quite pleased that that's wrapped up. So I just wanted to go over a few of my findings, just in case anyone else is watching and is remotely interested. So this is soldered PCB track. So the rail is held in place by solder to these pre-cut. Well, in some cases, these are pre-cut sleepers, and these longer ones come in different packs. The rail itself is in lengths of 500 millimeters. And the reason it's red coloured is because this is very fine material, and it's bullhead profile, but it's quite difficult often to see at an arm's length where the top is. So I just mark the top with a felt tip pen, which is handy because the felt tip pen causes the solder to be repelled, so you don't get too much solder on the railhead. And I think it's good policy to file the rail down a little bit afterwards, and it causes it to disappear. So the main differences, I found these very pleasurable and very easy to make compared to the previous ones. And that may be just, I'm sure some of it is because I've done it more, I've incremented more. But I think some of it also is because I'm actually taking advantage of the jigs and gauges that the society provide, the association provide. So I've got a few lined up. These are the ones that I'm using most. I've got 2 each of these, just because they're handy to have. And in my soldering box over here, get out this guy. So, yes, this is in my opinion, the essential components for track laying. Once you've got everything filed up. So I will quickly go over here and just illustrate the other jigs. So this is a jig used to file the railhead on the switch blades. So if I can get it out. So you place the rail underneath this brass block, and then you can rest this on this brass block, and then you simply move it back and forth, and it will file down the tip of the switch blades to the exact profile that you need. So you've got A, B, C, and D profiles. which are progressively shallower angles. I'm not sure where the other one's gone. These down here, I haven't got a hand to show you. These two, the aluminium block is to assemble the V if you're using etched components or wire to hold it together, and the black one is to file the angle of the V and assemble the V as well, and it clamps it down. Somewhere around here, I've got an additional jig. Aha, here we go. And this is a jig that you can use. To assemble the once you file the blades with this, you need to attach, well, you don't need to, but one of the ways you can actuate the turnout, because obviously you haven't got a spring and you haven't got a latch or anything like that. You need to find a way to do that yourself. So you can drop the wires from the end of the switch blades down underneath the layout, for example, or in my case, I went with insulated tie bars, so I'll show those in a second. But to do that, you need to attach little chairs to the bottom of the switch blades. So you can slide the rail in, across, where these holes are, those are actually little mini chairs. And that black dot in the center is where you place your chair. The rail just sits straight on top, and you can solder it straight in without having to align it by eye, which was half of the problem with all the other turnouts. I was doing it all by eye, and then not being too sure what I needed to gauge from where and how to do it. So you can see, if you look here, I'll try and find something to point with. Handy piece of rail. This is the switchblade that's filed down. So that is on the inside there. That is the correct angle for a B switch, and you tend to just file away a little bit of the not the webbing, the head and the foot of the rail on the other side as well. So you see it goes in quite smoothly. And that's about 1/10 of a millimetre, the end of that. So it's just pretty tiny, but it's done by a jig, so you don't need to worry too much. And yeah, this is the chair that goes in. So my pointer is resting on the chair, and there's actually a piece of rod that goes through the chair into this plastic thing. And so that jig I showed you earlier, it's got a hole for the rod to go down. I've just filed it flat on here because I don't want it to hit the wheels of the rolling stock. But quickly going back to the gauges. This is a triangle gauge, so it can be used for gauge widening. So if you place it on with the arrow pointing to the outside of the curve, outside of the curve? Inside of the curve, sorry. That will widen the gauge. So wherever the wide section is, I believe it will widen the gauge. I made a mistake when I was building the turnouts prior to this, where I was using this, and I'd set it to narrow the gauge accidentally. I was using it on a curved route, unintentionally narrowing the gauge everywhere. So it meant all my stock kept on derailing, and I didn't know why until I tried to put a roller gauge on there or a button gauge, and found that it wouldn't fit because the gauge was 0.5 mil too narrow. Yes, so this is a roller gauge, obviously, so used to measure and mark the distances between the rails. So that's on there quite firmly, and there are extra slots. If you see, I'll turn it around. Extra slots, and those extra slots are for wing rails. So if you need to if you want to place it over here, for example, you could then slot that rail in underneath, or put it there and put the gauge on top. But what I found actually is that it's actually easier to use this. I'm calling this a DIY slide gauge. So it's just a piece of rail with the ends bent up and coloured with felt tip pen, because that kind of repels the solder. And essentially you can use that as the gauge instead. So that's what this handy aluminium hair clip is for. So if you can imagine that outside check rail is soldered, but if it wasn't, this would be holding it flat and in place, and the aluminium hair clip would be there, and that's how I do it. So using these hair clips a lot to hold things together, so it's quite handy. When you've got, I can't really show you now because there's two sets of rails on this section. I can't place this in between the rails because it will bring them out of gauge. But when you've only got one switchblade in there, you need to gauge it properly. You can use this button gauge to just drop it in there, and then you can push this outside stock rail up to it. I mean, this section isn't soldered, so over here, for example, push this up to it, and you can be very sure that this rail here is gauged perfectly against this switch rail here. So these are super handy as well. And just so a combination of rails and a combination of gauges and jigs have just made this so painless. And with that track book that I've shown you, I'm overwhelmed at how easy it's been. So I'm just getting out a piece of rolling stock. So here is my demo wagon, and this is probably another salient point actually that I've found is this wagon has an etched underframe and a plastic body, and it's very free moving, as you can see, but also it's probably going to derail if I set this one to the correct route. It's not going to hold because it's all springy, but it will probably derail. Maybe not. It's not necessarily a bad thing if it derails, because I found that the weight of this wagon is so low, it must weigh just a few grams, that it's not even necessarily an issue with the track work, but any kind of dirt or dust, or if I'm using a piece of rail or something to push it around and I catch it underneath something, it's so easy for it to be dislodged and moved around and derailed that I was feeling like I was crazy because everything was derailing all the time and everything was perfect. So I'll be weighting this wagon. I mean, there's standard weights, and this is a shunting layout, not a big layout. So, but yeah, just a little bit of weight in there, it makes everything so much easier. It's so much more smooth. Aha, there you go. So fine that way, and then this way is a little dip. I don't know if you saw it there. I'll try and catch it. There you go. You just saw it as it went over the nose. So that would be enough to derail the wagon, I think, before I started adding just a tiny bit of weight to them. So yeah, all of that together has made this really fun and really enjoyable, not stressful at all, and I can't recommend it more highly as a pastime or as a hobby. And this is the end result of what you can see there. So the crossover here, it's going to fit here, and this little throat obviously is going to come down here. This is going to be a little plank layout that I'm going to build, and that's the next step really, is to get this track work off of there onto a piece of plywood that's cut to this shape, and then we can see where we go from there.